Rachel, your paper came out late last year. Why should for-purpose organizations be considering mergers now more than ever before?
The need for consolidation in the not-for-profit sector has been talked about for probably 10 years now. So it's by no means a new bit of information that's hit the sector. And so I think the imperative to merge and have the conversations now is less about the need and more about the maturity of the leaders in the sector now have the ability to actually lean into these conversations with intent and success.
If you had to justify consolidation without leading with cost saving, what's the best impact case? What's the greatest driver of consolidations and mergers?
I think the greatest driver for consolidation should always be impact. I think there's this perception that when you look at the finances, that we only merge when it's a failure and we don't have enough money. The opportunity for some small organizations to achieve greater reach and scale by merging with larger organizations, I think is missed and it's seen as a failure. And so when we put in place impact rather than money and we track things on impact, the outcomes are greater.
So there are over 60,000 charities in
Mm.
Australia. I'm sure you have the statistic for how many people per charity we have. So it's a very fragmented sector. What's the
Mm.
cost of staying fragmented? The cost for clients, but also the cost for communities.
Mm. The cost of governance and compliance and, to be fair, just running the finance, running the HR department, all of these things have great value. But when we're doing them at a small scale, we're not achieving the best ratios of structure to actually delivering on impact.
Totally agree. So I speak to a lot of CEOs and
Mm.
directors who are really positive about the idea of merging with aligned organizations, but then nothing happens. What do you think is really going on?
I think there are multiple things going on. The first one being that often when we're leading an organization, we're only thinking about that organization. We're not thinking about the sector more broadly. We're not thinking about would it be better if there were two organizations joined together and what impact would that have? I think there's other things in the background around often people are emotional about the word merger. Often we don't have enough experience in the not-for-profit space. They're not good examples. We think of merger as being failure. And so often it's not even the ability to get it on the table for conversation rather than it was a bad idea to start off with.
Yeah, fantastic. Some merger conversations seem to break down because they've been
Mm.
addressed the wrong way.
Mm.
Do you think there are any topics or stages of discussion that sometimes happen too early in a collaboration?
Legal structure and brand. If you want to make people really agitated, start threatening legal structure and brand. It is far better in these conversations to talk about the impact first, to talk about what would it look like to do work together in partnership or in a joint venture or under an MOU, than to start throwing around we should all just consolidate into one legal structure.
Yeah, that brand conversation is, I think, can derail an otherwise perfectly logical merger. And in fact, just last week, I was speaking to two really well aligned organizations who
Mm.
probably will get across the line because everything else is in place. But one of the CEOs told me they'd actually agreed what the merged brand should be about 6 months ago, before they'd
Mm.
even talked about shared vision, shared purpose. Now, I think they'll get over that, but it was just a real great example, I think, of getting things in the wrong order, getting excited or getting worried about things that should be really at the end of a process that takes second place behind shared purpose and client outcomes and that sort of thing.
And I think in the first 5 years, there's no issue with running the same brand, sorry, two different brands. There's no hurry to get to a single brand. Brand people are very smart. They can manage this. And over time, I think you will find that the brand conversation will come to light when all of the trust issues have kind of gone away and you've got used to working as one organization, brand kind of resolves itself at that point.
Yeah. Another analogy you might use is the brand's the kind of coat of paint on the outside of the house. You need to
Yeah.
structure the house right in the first place.
And I mean, if you take that analogy further, just because you have two houses on the street doesn't mean that you can't connect it with a tunnel at the back.
All right, you're really stretching that metaphor. Okay, that's good. Okay. I think fear plays a massive role in success or failure of mergers. From what you've seen, what do you reckon the most common fears are that people don't say out loud but influence behavior?
Mhm. Without a doubt, every CEO will say, I don't want my organization to merge with a larger organization. I want to be the one that merges with a smaller organization. And I think this is part of the problem in that when you're merging with a larger organization, the scale and the breadth of work that can be done through a larger organization can often further your mission far greater than scaling with a smaller organization. And so I think we've got this upside down.
Yeah, totally agree. One of the things that really stood out in your paper that I liked
Mm.
was the importance of having an aligned match rather than a perfect match. And those two terms sound similar, but I think in the space in between alignment and perfect match, you can really trip yourself up. Can you define what aligned match and perfect match look like in practice, please? And why is it important that you get alignment rather than
Mm.
perfection?
Perfect match doesn't exist. So if you're going after a perfect match, don't put it on your strategy. There's a recognition that an aligned match, there is probably about 80% where you overlap with either what you do as an organization, who your beneficiaries are, or the way in which you go about your business.
Yeah,
And it is important to focus on what are those commonalities because every merger is going to require compromise, but don't trip over those before you've actually explored the benefits of where your alignment is first. You want to have something to work towards. There needs to be a goal that inspires you to undertake the pain of a merger.
okay, that goal being the higher purpose that you get alignment on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or the goal that you want for a beneficiary that you can't achieve by yourself.
yeah, great. Uh, One of the aspects of that image of looking for an aligned match rather than a perfect match
Mm.
is you get the opportunity to focus on the commonalities rather than focusing on the differences.
Yes.
And I think in your paper you talk about the 80% rule, and I want to explore that
Mm.
a bit more in a
Mm.
moment. But if organizations have a significant overlap, if they have more commonalities than differences, I think there's absolute merit there in exploring collaborative models. If you're looking for perfect alignment and no differences, forget about it. They just don't exist.
Absolutely. It just doesn't exist. And so we've spoken to probably 15 sector leaders who have either gone through a merger or have embarked on a merger and haven't succeeded. Each one of them said, I had to be really clear on the one or two things that I wasn't willing to compromise on and recognize that everything else was up for grabs because this is a negotiation. It is not, you're not going out to find another organization that exists perfectly the same as you.
You use a different word there, but
Mm.
I've often talked about non-negotiables. What was the
Mm-hmm.
phrase you used?
I can't remember.
The things you're not willing to compromise on, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So those things you're not willing to compromise on, your non-negotiables.
Mm.
In a couple of examples I've come across, organizations have brought a suite of non-negotiables to the table.
Mm.
But if you can agree a North Star, suddenly even some of those non-negotiables suddenly become negotiable. If it was, for example, maintaining a role through a merge, a CEO or a chair's role,
Yes.
or maintaining a brand, or
Maintaining a constitution, I think if
all
you're
those things,
not
all those things.
willing to consider making a change to your constitution, you're probably not willing to do the right level of compromise for a merger.
Yeah. Yeah. So those things that feel like non-negotiables
Mm.
actually are things that you care about, but when you're in service of that higher purpose, they may
I
well become
think,
up for negotiation, up for grabs.
yeah, I think it comes down to identity. And I think our identity is so caught up sometimes in a founder story or in our mission statement that it is worthwhile doing the work as an organization to really determine who are we when we strip back all of the marketing documentation and all of our regulatory requirements. Who are we at our core? And I think the more that you can strip that back 10 layers, the clearer you get on what is the rock that makes us who we are, and the rest are negotiable.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Okay. So, Rachel, what are the first few tests you run to see if there's impact alignment?
Mm. Going to give you a crazy answer here and a hypothetical one. If you have two organizations, one that is dedicated to releasing birds and one that is dedicated to releasing turtles, on the surface, you would say they have no alignment, other than they are two wildlife organizations with the mission to release turtles and birds. And so the test for this organization would be, are we going to release more turtles and birds together than apart? It's a silly example, but it gets to the crux of alignment isn't sometimes in what you do, it is in how you do it. There is many different ways to find alignment, and so don't worry about the turtles and the birds being different. Really dig into what makes the DNA of an organization, and you often find alignment in um, sometimes unexpected places.
I think the converse is also true.
Mm,
So, even when there are the same beneficiaries, two
yeah.
entirely different methodologies can be like oil and water. So, I do some work in youth mental health and wellness.
Mhm.
A mentoring organization can be poles apart from an organization that goes in and runs mass workshops. And even though they're there to address mental health and well-being, supports for young people, they're so poles apart in their methodology. I don't think there's strong
Mm.
alignment there.
I think we don't talk about theory of change enough in not-for-profit strategy and in mergers because often the commonality comes through when you have a good understanding of your theory of change, which is how are we enacting this change? It can be applied to two different beneficiaries. And so on the surface, you may think we're not the same, where you have some really common either values or approaches or the outcomes that you're trying to achieve are quite similar.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's talk about merger readiness or
Mm.
readiness for at least a merger conversation. Can you tell me what that might mean in practical terms?
I think the board and the executive have to spend time learning about what not-for-profit merger looks like. There are enough cases that you can go and do the research to understand why did other not-for-profits merge. The second thing is about doing the internal work of the organization to understand what makes it unique. Where are the rocks that you're not willing to compromise on? And then the final thing is doing the work on your own emotions. Mergers always creates a spark of emotion like nothing else that we talk about, that there is something about standing firm in doing the work through the emotion of, oh, what if we are swallowed up by a big organization, that it takes away the fear that you can then assess merger opportunities appropriately.
Okay, and on the theme of readiness, what's one move a CEO or a board chair could make in the next 30 days that might move their organization towards some level of readiness for a merger, or at least not trigger a defensive negative reaction?
Conversations with other CEOs that are trusted seems to be the way that most mergers come about, whether that's chair to chair or CEO to CEO. Most mergers at the moment come out of existing trusted relationship. And so if you're a CEO that wants to pursue merger, building trusted relationships with other CEOs is the best thing that you can do in the sector, in the broken sector that we are around not having processes to facilitate merger, building trust is the best approach.
Do you think there's a place for boards to put collaboration on their board agenda? And if so,
Mm.
how do you reckon they should go about that in a way that doesn't trigger the turf protection that potentially a director or more likely a CEO might feel?
I think partnership sits within a lot of not-for-profit strategies. And so it's already there, but what we mean by it is often not far enough. And so we often are only partnering on a single project or a single service. And I think the real challenge to boards and to executive teams is how do we push the partnership further? How do we make it a larger piece of our shared organization?
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So let's talk about a case study. Well, I'd like you to talk about a case study, either one that you've been involved in or maybe one that you learned about through your paper.
Yeah.
What worked, what didn't, what did the merger hope to achieve, and what did the people and you learn from it?
Wonderful. Let me talk about Emergency Action Alliance. It is one that we featured within our paper, but we were also really privileged to talk to the CEO and understand some of the mechanics that sat behind that merger. We call it a merger, but it's actually the creation of a new entity which 15 other humanitarian organizations agreed to be in partnership with. And so in its technical term, it maybe doesn't even meet the definition of merger. And we don't care because it meets the definition of achieving more impact by doing more together.
Okay.
Now, what they did was they recognized that whenever a humanitarian emergency hit, and that can be flood, tsunami, earthquake are the ones that usually come to mind, that each of these 15 humanitarian organizations were taking their own fundraising campaign to market. And from an efficiency perspective, they weren't getting the right media presence, the messages were mixed. And from a consumer perspective, it meant that you had 15 different organizations asking you to give money to the same cause. And that is very confusing and doesn't build trust. What they recognized was if they came out with one collective, collaborative campaign when an emergency hit, the message would be clear. It gave the Australian government the opportunity to partner in the media with this one organisation, and so the breadth of message and the power of the message cut through with so much clarity. What they've found is that there are still supporters from each of those organisations that would give to those organisations because they already had relationship,
Yeah.
but they were converting the people that didn't know who to give to, who are like, we don't know whether to give to organisation B or organisation C. Oh, we don't have to make that choice anymore. We can give to the Emergency Action Alliance. And so from an impact outcome perspective, we can see that the funds being raised for humanitarian crises has increased, and that is the measure of success.
And would we have seen that model play out in some of the recent natural disasters in Australia? So were the floods in the northern rivers. I assume this came in after, was it the tsunami in 2000 and what, 2001?
It probably took a good 10 years after tsunami. Tsunami was probably the trigger point for recognizing when we go into emergency, we need to be more coordinated because it doesn't help anyone if we all turn up with water.
Yeah.
It's really only at an international emergency level. All of these agencies are internationally focused. It is probably something that the domestic sector could learn from. And so there's probably the challenge there for the domestic sector to follow suit uh, because it doesn't exist at a domestic level.
When an entity or a person says we'll lose our identity, what do you think they're actually afraid of losing?
Mm. I think when we take our examples from commercial world and we see the buying and selling of parts, that is what I think we're afraid of, that another organization would take our precious mission and envelop it in their mission, and we would cease to have an impact. When we did the interviews, the opposite is actually true. In not-for-profit mergers, the currency for merger is the promise of impact. And so another organization only takes your mission when they truly believe in it and they want to further it and they can see the value of doing that. And so I actually think the fear is unfounded around you're not going to be sold for parts. You're going to find another organization that is going to be able to take your mission and take it far further than your organization ever could.
But I think there's also a fear of abandoning history, betraying
Mm-hmm.
those who went before. And I think when people say we're scared of losing our identity or we will lose our
Mm-hmm.
identity, there's actually fear of betraying those that have preceded them in the organization and potentially compromising the brand equity. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you can spend too much time and energy thinking about brand equity when it's wrapped up in a logo and a history. But it certainly is front of mind for a lot of organizations looking at potential mergers. So,
And this is controversial, but I think the challenge actually in that question is, are we serving the legacy of our organization or are we serving the participants and the beneficiaries and the impact that our organization has? It pulls you in two different directions often.
yeah, I'd go further and say if you can approach a merger in a way that retains the support of stakeholders,
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest asset that exists within your history. The outcomes of clients 20 years ago, the brand that the organization's carried in the past on its own is not going to serve people tomorrow and in a year's
Mm-hmm.
time and in 20 years' time. It is arguable that the brand equity, which might be made manifest in loyalty from donors, clients, or other funders, um, losing that would be a significant challenge. But I would also suggest that managing a merger in the right way can protect brand equity and can honor the history and the legacy of those that have gone before while still building something more effective for clients of tomorrow and next year.
Further on that to say, looking after the frontline staff is critical in a merger because often when you're interacting with an organization, you don't care that your loom or mission imperative, you care that Alex is there and Rachel is there. And if you can make sure that those things exist, the actual brand people don't worry about as much as we think they do.
Yeah, I had great client quote the other day saying, I don't care who helps me, I just want to get the
Yeah.
help I need. And this was from an organization that had gone through a merge and changed their brand, and
Mhm.
the clients didn't care. Yeah.
The, And I think the need is so great. I love in the one of the examples that we pull out in the paper is the Camp Quality Canteen and Red Kite joint venture. They recognized when your child gets cancer, you actually don't know who to call, and having three of us is more confusing and does a disservice. Let's have a single point. And so the Cancer Hub was created for that exact reason because it recognized people care less about the they care less about the brand and they care more about knowing where to turn when they need help. And when you have 60,000 charities in the market, it is confusing for those that are needing help. It's hard to navigate.
100%. Yeah, I love that collaboration because it's comparatively loose in
Mm,
so much as, if you think about the spectrum of collaboration, there, I'm sure there's MOUs, probably even some JVs, some contractual obligations between partners. But it's transformed the experience of people affected by childhood cancer without having to go into corporate structures inherent with mergers. And I'm
mm.
so glad that's happened.
Me too. I often think we're approaching merger from the wrong direction. That if we took the 12 people in society that we need to help and said, okay, of person A who's experiencing these things, who are the 8 organizations that they're currently interacting with? Their experience would be profoundly different if we came at mergers from a user perspective and rather than a we're this organization and we need to protect it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely agree. Okay. The biggest myth about for purpose mergers is
That it's a failure, that you only do it when you fail and you run out of money.
a merger is a bad idea when
You want to stay exactly the same.
the first question a board should ask is
Mm. What could we achieve with another organization that we can't achieve by ourselves?
nice. 80% alignment means
Be flexible. Focus on what your commonalities are and be willing to accept that you are different.
approaching a merger. If you remember one thing, remember this.
Impact. Be clear on your impact, hold firm to the impact, fight for the impact, and don't worry about anything else.
Very good.
Alex, if someone is merger curious, what should they do in the next 30 days?
If they're a director, they should put collaborations on the next board agenda.
Mm.
If they're a CEO, they should go and knock on the doors of organizations that look like they're aligned and just have an open conversation. And if you have either role, CEO or director, get in touch with an organization like Loom Consulting that can help you navigate what otherwise can be a very sensitive and complex topic. Mm. So, Rachel, we've talked today about some of the content in your brilliant paper, More Meaningful Mergers. First thing, why is it called More Meaningful Mergers?
It's called More Meaningful Mergers because we wanted it not to be seen as the last resort. We want it to be in people's strategies as a proactive growth tool for impact, not as a last resort when you run out of money.
Okay. And where can people find this brilliant paper?
Mission Imperative website, mergers, download it.
We'll also put it on the Loom Consulting website with all appropriate acknowledgements, and we'll put it on socials because I think it's a really interesting paper for leaders of for-purpose organizations to read and think about.
I've been invited to talk to a number of boards now that have said, we think we might want to talk about merger, but we don't know where to start. And so just as an introduction to content, I've been talking to boards about the More Mergers paper, and it has raised some really interesting questions, but has also given them some frameworks about how to navigate the conversation about how ready they are to embark on a merger. And I'm sure, Alex, you and I would be really happy to have conversations with people together or apart.
100%, absolutely. The more conversations happen along these lines, the more social impact will be created and the better our sector will be.
Absolutely. We would be remiss to not say, of course, we would work together while we're talking about mergers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's certainly collaboration in there somewhere.